You installed it already. You probably did not even think twice about it. Windows told you an update was ready. You clicked install. Maybe you walked away to get a coffee while it ran. And when you came back, your machine had rebooted and everything looked exactly the same as before. Same desktop, same taskbar, same icons. Nothing obviously different. Nothing that would make you stop and ask what exactly just changed on my computer. And that is precisely the point. Because what just changed on your computer is not something Microsoft wants you to look at closely. What just changed is buried in language about security fixes and stability improvements. The kind of language they have trained you over years to associate with routine maintenance. The kind of language that makes you click install without reading a single word of what is actually in the package. The June 2026 cumulative update for Windows 11 is not a routine patch. It is not primarily about security fixes. It is not primarily about stability. What it actually is, underneath the marketing language, is the most significant expansion of Microsoft's data collection and advertising infrastructure that Windows has ever shipped in a single update. And it landed on your machine silently, automatically, with your implied consent, because you had the option to opt out if you had known exactly where to look 4 menus deep in a settings screen that Microsoft made as hard to navigate as they possibly could. I am going to tell you exactly what this update contains. I am going to tell you exactly what it does to your machine and to your data. And then I'm going to tell you something that the tech industry has been quietly building toward for years. Something that is now genuinely, practically, realistically ready for you as an alternative. Because this update is not just a privacy problem you can patch around. It is a signal. It is the clearest signal yet that the relationship between you and your Windows machine has fundamentally changed. And once you understand what changed and why, the question of whether to stay on Windows becomes a lot harder to answer the way Microsoft wants you to answer it. Let us start with what this update actually contains, because the first thing you need to understand is recall. If you were paying attention back in 2024 when Microsoft first announced recall, you remember the reaction. Security researchers did not mince words. They called it a privacy catastrophe, and they were right to. Recall is a feature that takes continuous screenshots of everything happening on your screen, every few seconds, automatically, silently, without any visible indicator that it is running. It processes those screenshots using AI. It stores them in a searchable database. And the idea behind it, the productivity pitch, is that you can later search through everything you have ever done on your computer and find it again. Saw a website 3 weeks ago and cannot remember where. Recall has it. Working on a document last month and cannot find the file. Recall photographed it, cannot remember what that email said. Recall stored a screenshot of it. That is the pitch. Here's the reality. What recall functionally is, stripped of all the productivity language, is a complete photographic surveillance record of your entire computing life. Every banking website you have ever visited, every private message you have ever written or received, every medical search you have ever made at 2 a.m. when you were scared and thought nobody was watching, every document containing sensitive personal or professional information that has ever been open on your screen, every password field you have ever filled in, and yes, that last one is documented. Security researchers confirmed that the initial version of Recall captured password fields that were supposed to be masked. The characters that appear as dots on your screen so nobody can read your password over your shoulder. Recall photographed the underlying content anyway, your passwords, in a database, on your machine. When this came out in 2024, the backlash was so immediate and so intense that Microsoft paused the rollout. They made public statements. They said they were listening to concerns. They said Recall would be made opt-in rather than opt-out. They said users would be clearly informed and clearly in control. And for a stretch of time, it genuinely seemed like the sustained pressure from the security community and from users who understood what was being proposed had actually worked. That Microsoft had looked at what they built, heard the objections, and decided to pull back. They did not pull back. They waited. And the June 2026 update is where the waiting ended. Recall is back. It is re-enabled on all supported hardware by this update. And the opt-in mechanism that Microsoft promised, the clear, upfront, impossible-to-miss choice they said they would give users, is buried. 4 menus deep in a settings screen that the overwhelming majority of Windows users will never navigate to. The default is on. If you installed the June update and you have not gone looking for that setting specifically, Recall is running on your machine right now. Your screen is being photographed. Everything you do is being cataloged. And the data, while technically stored locally on your device, is processed in ways that feed into Microsoft's AI training and advertising ecosystem. This is not an interpretation of the privacy policy. This is in the updated privacy policy, the one that was quietly revised alongside the June patch without any announcement, without any notification, without any of the transparency that Microsoft publicly promised. But recall is not the only thing this update delivered, because alongside the recall re-enablement, the June 2026 patch also expands what Microsoft calls personalized experiences. That phrase, personalized experiences, is doing an enormous amount of corporate work to describe something much simpler and much more invasive. It means targeted advertising, delivered through the operating system itself, not through a website, not through an app you chose to install, through Windows, through the operating system running on the machine you purchased. Windows 11 already had ads before this update. The Start menu showed sponsored applications. The lock screen showed sponsored content. File Explorer surfaced promotional material. These were already deeply inappropriate for a paid operating system. You are not getting Windows for free in exchange for seeing ads the way you might accept ads on a free service. You paid for Windows, or you paid for the machine that came with Windows included in its price. You already paid, and Microsoft was already running ads on it. The June update takes that T framework and expands it dramatically. The new advertising system can now deliver ads based on your usage patterns, what applications you use, what websites you visit in Edge, what files you work on, what you search for using Windows search. If the operating system is watching how you use your computer and selling that behavioral data to advertising partners. You are not the customer of this relationship. You are the product. And the computer you bought with your own money is the mechanism through which that product relationship is monetized. There's also a larger context here that makes the June update even harder to dismiss as an isolated event. Windows 10 reached its end of life in October 2025. That deadline has now passed. Every machine still running Windows 10 as of right now in June 2026 is running an operating system that Microsoft is no longer patching. No more security updates, no more vulnerability fixes. Known exploits will remain unaddressed, and Microsoft's position on this is not sympathetic. Their position is upgrade to Windows 11 or accept the security risk. But upgrading to Windows 11 is not possible for millions of perfectly functional computers because of Microsoft's hardware requirements. The TPM 2.0 chip requirement, the specific CPU generation cutoffs, computers that run completely fine, that do everything their owners need them to do, that have years of useful life remaining. These machines cannot run Windows 11, not because they are genuinely incapable, but because they lack specific chips that Microsoft decided to require. And the decision to require those chips was not primarily about security or capability. It was about driving hardware sales and accelerating the migration to Windows 11's more fully developed data collection and advertising infrastructure. This is the environment in which the June 2026 update lands. It is not a patch. It is a policy statement. It is Microsoft telling you, through the language of software rather than the language of words, that your computer is theirs to monetize and your data is theirs to collect and your computing behavior is theirs to sell. And they are telling you this in a way that is technically legal because it is disclosed in documents written specifically to prevent comprehension, and technically consensual because you had the option to refuse if you had known exactly what to refuse and exactly where to find the refusal mechanism. You do not have to accept this. And here's where I want to spend the rest of this conversation, because there is an alternative. There has always been an alternative. But for a long time, the honest answer was that the alternative required a level of technical knowledge and tolerance for friction that put it out of reach for most everyday computer users. That is no longer true. And the June 2026 update is the moment that tips the balance decisively enough that talking about the alternative is no longer a niche conversation for enthusiasts. It is a practical conversation for anyone who owns a computer. The alternative is Linux. And before that word triggers the reaction it has historically triggered, the image of a command line, of arcane terminal commands, of spending weekends troubleshooting drivers, let me ask you to set that image aside for a moment. Because it is outdated. It was partially accurate a decade ago. It describes almost nothing about what Linux actually looks like in 2026. The modern Linux desktop is genuinely straightforwardly usable by anyone who can use Windows. Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, Pop! OS, these are operating systems with graphical interfaces, software managers that work like app stores, and default software selections that cover every basic computing need out of the box. The installation process takes less than 30 minutes. The interface is immediately familiar, and the software you actually use every day, Firefox runs on Linux, Chrome runs on Linux, Zoom runs on Linux, Spotify runs on Linux, VLC runs on Linux, LibreOffice, which is completely free and handles Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files, runs on Linux natively. The gaming barrier, which was the single most legitimate objection to Linux for years, has been dismantled by Valve. Valve built a compatibility layer called Proton specifically to run Windows games on Linux. Steam on Linux, through Proton, can now play the vast majority of the Windows gaming library with performance that matches, and sometimes exceeds, the same games running on Windows. The Steam Deck, which has sold millions of units, runs a Linux-based operating system. Valve invested massively in making this work because a world where Microsoft controls gaming as a threat to Valve's business, the beneficiaries of that investment are Linux users. The idea that you cannot game on Linux is no longer accurate. But here is what I want you to really sit with. What do you gain when you switch to Linux? Not just what do you avoid. What do you actually gain? You gain an operating system that does not photograph your screen every few seconds. You gain an operating system that does not run ads. You gain an operating system that does not require you to log into a corporate account to use your own computer. You gain an operating system that does not send your usage behavior to advertising partners. You gain software that serves you, not a corporation's revenue targets. Your computer becomes your computer again, completely and without qualification. You also gain performance. Linux does not accumulate background bloat the way Windows does. It does not run dozens of telemetry processes and update agents consuming your CPU and memory in the background. A Linux installation, 3 years. Old runs just as well as it did on day one. A Windows installation 3 years old is typically noticeably slower than it was when it was new, for reasons that have everything to do with Microsoft's background processes and nothing to do with your hardware aging. And Linux extends the life of your hardware directly. That computer that cannot run Windows 11 because it lacks a TPM 2.0 chip, it can run Linux Mint, it can run Ubuntu, it can run almost any Linux distribution without issue. The hardware Microsoft declared obsolete is not obsolete. It is just incompatible with Microsoft's current data collection requirements. Linux does not have those requirements. It runs on older hardware beautifully. Now, let me be honest about the real limitations, because you deserve an honest assessment rather than a sales pitch. If your professional workflow depends on Microsoft Office with complex macros and very precise formatting, LibreOffice handles most things well, but is not a perfect replacement in every edge case. The practical answer here is that Microsoft 365 runs in a web browser, and that browser runs on Linux. For the majority of professional Office use cases, the web versions of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint are completely sufficient. But for highly specialized work, this is a genuine consideration worth thinking through before you switch. If your workflow lives inside Adobe Creative Cloud, Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, After Effects, these do not have native Linux versions. There are alternatives. GIMP for photo editing, Inkscape for vector graphics, DaVinci Resolve for video editing, and DaVinci Resolve is not a compromise. It is a professional-grade application used in actual film and television production that runs natively on Linux. But if your entire professional identity is built around Adobe's specific tools, and switching them is genuinely not realistic right now, that is a real barrier, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. For everyone who does not fall into those two specific categories, and that is the majority of people who use computers, the barriers are much lower than they look from the outside. A few hours of your time. A USB drive. A willingness to spend 2 weeks learning where things are in a new environment. Most people who make the switch report that after 2 weeks they are as comfortable on Linux as they ever were on Windows. After a month, most of them do not want to go back, not because Linux is perfect, because Windows has become something they no longer want to use. If you are going to try Linux for the first time, start with Linux Mint. It was designed specifically for people coming from Windows. The interface is immediately familiar. Taskbar at the bottom, Start menu equivalent T in the bottom left corner, System tray on the right. Software installation works through a graphical manager that feels like an app store. The community is large, welcoming, and specifically experienced in helping Windows users through the transition. Any problem you run into has almost certainly been solved by someone else already, and a simple search will find the answer. Ubuntu is the other strong entry point. The largest Linux community, corporate backing from Canonical, excellent support, and a long guaranteed development roadmap. Pop! OS is built on Ubuntu with a cleaner interface and particularly strong hardware support for gaming. Fedora runs slightly more cutting-edge software, which means newer features, but occasionally newer bugs as well. All of them are better than a Windows machine that is photographing your screen, selling your usage data, and delivering ads through the operating system of a computer you already paid for. The June 2026 update is a trap in a very specific and deliberate sense. It normalizes surveillance. It normalizes the idea that your operating system has the right to photograph everything you do. It normalizes the idea that your usage patterns are a commodity to be harvested and sold. It normalizes the idea that the computer you own is not really yours, that the company that made its software can change the terms of how it operates at any time through a mandatory update, whether you agreed to the new terms or not. And it does all of this gradually enough, buried deep enough, disclosed technically enough that most people never notice it is happening. Microsoft knows exactly what they are doing. They know that most users will never find the recall setting buried 4 menus deep. They know that most users will not read a privacy policy that was updated without announcement. They know that most users will install the update because they have been trained for years to treat updates as safe and necessary. And they know that the people who notice and object are outnumbered by the people who do not. The update is designed to work on that math. It is designed to expand Microsoft's data reach in the space between what is disclosed and what is understood. You are watching this video because you are not in the group that does not notice. You noticed. And now you have a choice to make. The alternative is free. It is mature. It is private. It is ready for you right now. Download Linux Mint, put it on a USB drive, boot from it without installing anything, and run it live for an hour. Open the browser, open the Office suite, open the file manager, see exactly what you're getting before you commit to a single thing, and then decide whether the computer you paid for should be working for you, or for Microsoft. That decision is yours. Make it with your eyes open.